Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Love Procurement Podcast. My name is Kelly Barner, and I will be your host for today's conversation. I'm glad to welcome Laura Smith back to the show. Laura is Ivalua's Vice President of Sales for North America, and she's here today to share the unique trends, successes, and challenges procurement is facing in this part of the world. So, hi, Laura. Thank you so much for being back on the Love Procurement Podcast.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me back again. This is great to speak with you.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to mostly focus on the United States today, but first, maybe to get a little bit of context, you're also constantly having conversations with your colleagues that live and work in different parts of the world. What's one of the things that having access to a global colleague base and potentially even customers all over the world gives you sort of an interesting set of insights, perspective on what's different, what's interesting in different parts of the world? Maybe give us sort of a big picture, and then we'll start drilling down into the United States.
Yeah, thanks for that. Great question. One thing I love about Ivalua is from its infancy, Ivalua has always been a global company serving global customers, like you mentioned. And so, very early on in the organization, we knew we needed a global team. And so our operating model has always been to stay very relevant to the local culture and even specific countries. And so personally, I've always wanted to pursue a career in international business. So in many ways, this is kind of fulfilling a desire in me that I've had for a while. But I love that as we've grown over the years as an organization, we haven't tried to bring leaders in from outside of countries to lead regions they're not familiar with. That's really helped us to develop strong relationships locally and develop, where we know the market. And so we have boots on the ground right where we are. And so although there's commonalities in the procurement function across the globe, there's still different ways of how they buy and how those organizations buy. And so much of that has to do with culture. And so I'll give you a great example. We have a customer that recently became a customer of ours earlier this year. That's a $30 billion aerospace and defense customer. And during the sales cycle, we had 4 different regions, Australia, America, UK, and Sweden, all providing local support during and now after the sales cycle. And, we have a global governance model, but really that local support in local operations. And so, I've had the privilege now being here almost 8 years of hearing just these incredible stories of what procurement leaders are doing in APAC and EMEA and local to their regions, but also being able to participate and have the privilege of joining my peers and helping serve some of these really large global brands. And so it's super exciting to be able to be a part of that.
One of the other themes that I think very much ties into this idea of international, yes, but also with a local or regional focus, and of course what procurement's focus is always on, is on the economy in all of these different locations and how that drives the priorities of companies, of supplier investment. Based on the conversations that you're having, either with colleagues, with existing customers, maybe even with prospects, how would you say that the current economy is showing itself in terms of an organization's priorities around procurement, but then procurement's own priorities for the work that they're doing?
Yeah, it's a big question. And it's a complex operating environment that we're all living in. On one hand, you have a brand new presidential administration coming in this year. You've got new tariffs that have really disrupted many industries that we sell into and that we work with, like manufacturing, especially automotive. And they've caused supply chain costs to elevate, a lot of raw material delivery times to increase substantially. And, a lot of customers that we're working with are reevaluating a lot of their sources of supply. And, we haven't yet seen a massive impact on inflation yet here in the US. But as a tech provider in sales to selling into procurement, we have seen procurement now have more cost control, as that's returning as kind of a very high priority for many leaders, meaning there's not a lot of discretionary spend. That's they're having to navigate just budget constraints. And some of them are looking and waiting and seeing what's going to happen in the economy. Some are doubling down on what they've already invested in, or they're just taking their time in terms of transformation. So that might be on one hand, given what's happening at macroeconomic level. On the other hand, we also are seeing some that the demand for AI is proving to be stronger than the impact of the
Absolutely.
economy, and what's happening even from geopolitical uncertainty. And many customers have expedited their business case for procurement technology, and they're looking for ways to modernize technology faster. And it's become almost a race to some folks where they really want to increase productivity and drive efficiency. And they see the AI as being an anchor to really drive that business case forward. And so there's a compelling case for it now. And a good example is recently in public sector, an entity came to us, which normally you would think that industry is typically a little bit slower. But they came to us ready and willing to say, can we speed up our go live date? We want to see wins faster. And so, in spite of what's happening in the US economy, we still are seeing large investments being made. And we think continuing to be made, given just where we are with AI at this unique point in time, too.
Yeah, I think AI has been such an interesting trend to watch over the last couple of years. It went from being sort of a fringe, maybe it was in movies or science fiction books or something like that, to being the number one thing that we all talk about in every conversation. I'd be interested from your perspective as someone in sales, maybe a little bit of how you've seen that conversation evolve over time. Like if you were to almost scatter plot, right? The questions or the information that was requested or how much of a role that played in procurement's decision to go and evaluate solutions. How has AI kind of come onto the scene in that process?
Yeah, I think we're in a very big learning phase right now. So I think a lot of people are just trying to understand what is it that they can leverage internally right now, and what does that look like? There's a lot of learning from peers, and so we're trying to connect. We're trying to learn ourselves as much as our customers are. I think everyone's in a level playing field with that. But as they take it on, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about this later regarding to talent. But we're sensing that as they're reimagining their own function, I think that's where pilots and testing technology comes into play, and really getting their hands on using what are potential outcomes that we could expect to achieve, and what are some of the use cases that we can start to test on a smaller scale, but that could be rolled out more globally. And so we're seeing a lot of pilots and a lot of testing from clients to get to understand what's possible and learning from each other in this phase.
And I think it's interesting because it ties back to that story you shared about the public sector organization or agency, not necessarily maybe looking to change what they were going to implement, but thinking differently about the timing that could be hit. Especially if you're implementing anything that involves data or anything where you have to go through a process redesign. Certainly those are areas where we can plug in AI. So it's not necessarily, I would like to be able to wave a magic wand and have all my work be done. It's not that far, but it's certainly entering into the thought process. And I think it's at least challenging people to look at, okay, in the past, this would have taken me X months. Now I think with AI's help, I can probably pull that in by a meaningful percentage. It's just interesting how it even enters the thought process, let alone the implementation effort.
Yeah. And even on the implementation side, I think some of the common practices we're seeing, we often get RFPs with procurement organizations putting together a list of their requirements and how they want to implement. But 9 times out of 10, those requirements change or are changing so rapidly. So, and they should expect it to change and it not be foreign to them, because we're in a very rapidly changing environment. Sometimes that change can be as a result of just internal change, maybe different budgets getting approved or scope changing based on like what you said, AI coming into play. And sometimes those requirements change as a result of external factors. There's new regulatory policies or things coming out. And so my challenge when you're thinking about implementation to procurement leaders is expect change to happen within your requirements, be adaptable to implementing different ways. But look at solutions that can adapt with you, because implementation isn't a one-time thing. It's an iterative journey. And I think as we're exploring with AI, and there's going to be a lot of tools that within our own products that are coming to market, that iterative journey of new innovations will always be kind of at the forefront of this new way of implementing in my mind. And so pick a technology partner that's going to be sitting shotgun with you and being, able to adapt with you on that journey, because I sense that's going to be really important. We had a recent customer of ours from a retailer company who had a really aggressive growth model in mind, and they were building out new stores. And unfortunately, they had a large dependency on China. And so when Trump was elected this year and the tariffs hit, and they had a lot of impacted commodities that were impacted by tariffs, it was a challenge for them. And instead of building out new stores, which was kind of their go-to, they had to rethink most of their commodity strategies. And so, like most retailers, they managed to move kind of their business from China to Vietnam and to the Philippines, but it wasn't enough. And so they had to rethink procurement, like their operating model. And that means as their procurement backbone solution, we also had to be a part of rethinking as their tool of choice, how they would go about running their procurement organization. And, they told me if we didn't have a tool like Ivalua that could adapt quickly and at scale, we might not have been able to survive in terms of all these flow downs to customers. There might have been a lot of massive increases in costs, and we might not have been able to absorb those, right? So when thinking about implementation specifically, don't just think about the needs today, but think about what you're building for tomorrow and how adaptable that's going to be, because it's going to change, and you're going to need a tool that's going to be able to change right along with you.
And then, of course, everything else is going to have to change in conjunction with that. You mentioned procurement operating model. I think that's such an important thing for us to keep considering. And I'll date myself here, right? Because I remember being a part of sort of the first wave of e-sourcing type tools coming in. And of course, everybody right out of the gate said, oh, there's this great new tool. We're going to implement it. It's going to fix everything.
Everything. It's not. Yeah.
So we can't allow ourselves to make that same mistake. We need to make sure that everything is sort of moving along in parallel to the extent that we can do that, and thinking about, okay, either what are our shifting business objectives? How do we need to tweak tech and talent to go with that? Or what are the amazing things that this new technology is able to help us do? How can we push ourselves towards stretch business impact outcomes or change our investments in talent? Let's come around to that talent point. Are you seeing companies in the decision-making process figuring it all out together, or do they come to the table saying, we want to be part of this AI revolution that's taking place within procurement, and we're going to go there first and then get ourselves up to speed and then figure out the implications for talent and operating model? How are you seeing companies sort of logic through the planning process and the timeline for all that?
I think everything's on the table right now. I think we don't really fully know how AI is going to impact talent decisions within procurement. And I'm thinking about the same way in sales. But I think starting to reimagine the function and what AI can do for them. Talent decisions, I feel, will need to consider both upskilling and then hiring people who are embracing kind of new competencies. And I think competencies are going to be drastically different even from where they are today in the next few years. We might be hiring for roles that we've never really hired for before. And for procurement, that could be kind of AI specialists, sourcing specialists. It could be prompt engineering experts. It could be risk analysts who architect their own data models or even build agents that do that. So, what you're hiring for might need to be reevaluated. And, you look back in the 80s, the competencies usually had like a 30-year lifespan. Digital competencies today are losing their lifespan in less than just a few years. And so they're constantly changing. So we kind of need to stay up to date with that. Now, on the technology side, I'm having the same conversations about sales, right? When we're thinking about talent, how do we have the best in class sales force for the future? And, experience used to be a really big factor in hiring sales leaders. When I'm considering is experience really the most relevant thing anymore? I don't know. Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. And, on the procurement side, a lot of the technology in the world won't save you if your team lacks the skills to really leverage it. So how are we, going to upskill our people that will be important. And I imagine that, especially in procurement, that data literacy, or that element of understanding data intelligence, is going to be more important, as important as negotiation skills, but maybe
Yeah.
we'll even outsource some of the negotiation. So it's really thinking about what are the competencies of the future. And, I think initially when this all came out recently, it was a little bit of a scare of like, is my job going to go away? And, we did some research of ourselves, and we found that 60% of procurement leaders believe that it's going to transform their job for the better. And that, only 11% see it as a threat, that majority actually see it as an opportunity. And we're seeing that across the board from our customers too, that fear of job destructions kind of maybe in the back of their mind. But I think even recently the World Economic Forum came out with a study that said that they predict 92 million jobs might be eliminated, but over double that will be created as a result of this. So we don't obviously know the full impact on what AI can do in terms of procurement talent decisions, but I think it's pretty exciting. I think it's now more than ever the best time to be a part of procurement.
And one of the interesting pieces of that, I think, actually ties sales and procurement together, because increasingly the skills that are the most important are the people skills. It's being able to be in a video call or in a room or looking at an email and sort of processing between the lines and thinking something's up or something's being held back, or just having that, I don't know, that spidey sense, something is off, and being able to respond to it in a way that either heads off a risk or opens an opportunity. Those things become massive, and those capabilities are equally required on both sides of sort of the procurement sales divide.
100%. And as AI hopefully takes on a lot of the tactical functions, I'm most excited about having more time to build that face-to-face relationships with others, and driving the more human element, and having more time for the human element, because it does feel like a lot of the busy work, we're still doing a lot of that today, that if you do reimagine that work, I'm excited to build more relationships, have more of the human element a part of those discussions. So yeah.
And speaking of those connections, you've had a number of interesting opportunities recently, I understand, as part of the Procurement Innovation on Tour series of events.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about those events and maybe some of what you're hearing at them.
Yeah, so Ivalua is going on tour. It's happening all around the world, and we'll be sharing some tour dates for 2026 really soon. But what that means is that it's a completely free one-day event, and we gather procurement, we gather supply chain and IT and finance leaders, and we explore how technologies, especially around generative AI, can transform productivity and decision making. And why are we doing this? It's really, instead of expecting the community to come to us, we're just going out to them. So into local cities and where procurement leaders are located, and we're coming to them. And really, anyone listening to this podcast or anyone within our community is welcome to join. We have industry experts there. We have partners and customers, and we'll showcase a lot of our latest innovations and live demos. And really, it's a chance for everyone to ask questions, exchange ideas. We're all learning, we're growing, we're learning what's working in procurement, all in a very collaborative, kind of peer-driven environment. So we have one coming up, where we have one on September 9th in Toronto and October 14th in DC. And then next year we're going to 4 different locations.
Excellent. Well, and it's interesting as you talk about participating in these events and the different types of not just experts and roles, but also functional backgrounds that are coming together at these events. I have to think it's uniquely interesting to be a sales professional at a company that predominantly caters to procurement professionals. It's really this sort of interesting, not oil and water, right? I guess at the same time, you could shake it and it all comes together. It might make some bubbles, but it's all coming together eventually. When you think about the good relationships that you've either experienced or have had the opportunity to observe between the procurement side and the sales side, what would you say are some signs that there's a very healthy, strong relationship in place?
I think it's like any other relationship. I mean, I think it comes down to trust, being very open and honest and communicative about what we both can and can't do, and how we drive the relationship forward. But I think it's built on trust, and trust in order to trust someone, you have to know them. You have to get to know each other. And so, in functions where they're not always have the same goals in mind at times, or they maybe have an agenda behind it, I think we have to kind of put that aside, and really form strong relationships together. And I try to do that during the sales cycle. What's interesting about Ivalua is it's the same team that's supporting our customers post-sale as it is pre-sale. So we like to develop that relationship early on, because we're going to be having that relationship even after it, and more importantly, when they become a customer. I think that's important. And so, transparently, I think there's work we could probably both do on each side to form that relationship sooner. And whether or not you pick Ivalua as our selected technology, my goal is really that not only do you evaluate the product, but you're able to evaluate us as humans and as a company and our culture just as much as you do our product, because both are equally important in my mind.
Any advice for situations where maybe someone listening or watching us have this conversation is thinking, I'm feeling friction with my sales reps, and whether that's a platform provider, a service
That never
provider.
happens, right, Kelly?
No, not ever. But in an imaginary world, if it did happen, maybe the personalities aren't clicking, maybe something has gone wrong, maybe communication isn't flowing. Do you have any advice for how to try to resolve those situations, hopefully without making the friction worse?
Yeah, I mean, first off, hopefully there's an open forum. Like I try to establish just a frequent communication channel up front, so that both parties, we can express concerns openly, or expectations or feedback on an open, so it doesn't fester or doesn't get to be too long. I think long-term relationships, there's got to be an expectation. It's not always going to be butterflies and rainbows. We're not perfect on the Ivalua side, and neither are our customers, but it's important to be proactive and not let an issue fester. So as soon as I see, something that might be going sideways, or maybe a red flag, or something's going in the wrong direction, I think it's important to just proactively address it and open up the communication lines. I think that troubled relationships can actually be an opportunity to grow intimate. And so if you see it in that way, and so in those situations, I try to do as much listening as I can and asking a lot of questions. And then I think it's important for both sides to really collaborate on a solution, whatever that solution might be, but both sides coming together, because that builds trust. And then when you deliver on the change, that builds like a promise together that you've worked towards. And so, my challenge is to procurement, let's not just engage when there's friction, or, when there's a problem, but I like to engage at all points in time. So highs and lows, right? We're in it together as partners. And so it's establishing that open communicative forum. There will always be positives. There'll be some negatives, but I think it's addressing them head on. Yeah.
Now, maybe another way of looking at this, procurement spends so much time dealing with sales professionals at the whole range of suppliers and providers that they deal with. A lot of times they don't know the sales professionals in their own company. And yet they're all part of the same team, hopefully pulling in the same direction. How would you suggest procurement go about building a relationship where one maybe doesn't exist with the sales team inside of their own company?
Yeah, I mean, just first off, just carve out time to do that, because any relationship takes time. In today's world where we're so busy, it's often like relationships are important, and they make all the difference, really. And I think, with enough humility, you can learn from everyone. And so come at it with a humble attitude of what can you learn from that organization? I think I learned just as much from procurement, because they're very good at negotiating. And that's actually helped me in my own negotiation, right? And so what can you learn from each other to help each other grow? And so first take time take time out of your schedule to get to know everyone within your organization, including sales. But I think sales and procurement can learn a lot from each other, as they're doing a lot of similar things that we don't always consider. And so it's a unique opportunity, I think, to really learn from one another.
Yeah. And I'll even observe, it's usually not safe to generalize, but this is a nice generalization, so I'll share it. You don't get ahead in sales by being grouchy, unpleasant, or antisocial. So typically, if someone is in sales and doing well, they're usually a very nice person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that does make
Yeah.
it easier to make the outreach. I think every procurement professional's had an example of where you try to approach marketing. Okay, maybe they don't want their money managed. Maybe
Right.
hit a little bit of static there. Sales typically is very arms wide open, has been my experience. They're
It's
glad
very
to meet
true.
anybody. They tend to be extroverted. So it's kind of an
It should be
easy
easy. Yeah.
bridge to cross. Exactly.
Yeah. You will be well embraced if you reach out.
Exactly. Now, Laura, this has been really interesting. We've got to talk about international things, US topics, economic things, trends like AI. Given all of the conversations that you're having, the travel that you have coming up, and so much that's changing as we start to wind down 2025, any final thoughts or observations or pieces of advice that you want to offer to listeners?
Yeah, it's a good question. As a final thoughts would be, prospects and customers that I work with, they really want technology providers to understand them, which is nothing new here. But too often, I do think procurement technologies providers don't understand the problems that procurement is trying to solve. And I admit I didn't always really understand the problems procurement is trying to solve. And they're changing and they're being added more and more, right? And actually, technology is just one piece of the transformation that's happening. And sometimes sales and I'm selling procurement technology can seem like that's the only thing, right? But there's so much more to that. I recently had the privilege to interview Manulife Financial Corporation on stage at our customer conference earlier this year. And they're if you're not familiar with it, they're like a $20 billion financial institute in Canada. And they've been around for like 160 years. But procurement was largely an ignored function in the last 5 years, and they only had about 10 to 15 people running like billions of dollars in spend, and a lot of decentralized processes, different countries doing different things. And on the technology side, they didn't really fundamentally invest too much in technology, and they were going through this massive transformation. But growing the department from 15 people to 100 people, and really moving things from decentralized to be centralized, and they wanted to do this in phases, and they drove a really big transformation, which ended up being massively big, meaning like 500 million in 3 years of savings. And that's,
Wow.
that's not a private number. They publicly reported that. But what they said that made the difference, that stood out to me when I was interviewing the CPO, was that Ivalua is a great product and that made all the difference. But having a team and the people behind the technology that understood us made the difference. And so that resonated with me, that, go a layer deeper to really understand procurement, really understand what they're going through holistically, not just my piece of the pie, not just my world of technology, but what are they really trying to achieve at a very bigger, like a macroeconomic level? Because if we can play a small part in that, and relate and be able to share how our solutions can really help drive transformation, it makes all the difference. I see too many technology vendors trying to bundle in tons of products, maybe for free or highly discounted, to try to sell more, without really knowing what the business problem is they're trying to solve, or what the use cases are, or what at a higher level that organization's trying to achieve. And so, I'm grateful that at Ivalua, we've got a little bit more freedom than probably most technology companies to define our strategy and execute on that strategy. Given we're owned, management employees are majority ownership. And so, for us, I think that's important, is that human element and understanding the problems that procurement is trying to solve. So if you're a technology vendor, maybe listening, go the extra mile, or you're in sales, go the extra mile to really know your customers and the prospects intimately, not just during the sales cycle, but especially after. And if you're a procurement leader, select a solution provider that really knows you and that wants to know you and that can be a partner with you, and get to know your sales folks, because that you can learn a lot from them just as much as we're learning from you. And I'll leave you with that.
Well, and I think that especially the Manulife story, that's a fantastic example of so much of what we talked about, the people and the tech all coming together to truly drive change. I appreciate the fact that they shared that story on stage. I think it's wonderful to capture it here. Laura, it's been absolutely fantastic having you back on the show. I'm sure it won't be the last time, but thank you so much for rejoining us.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate so much the time. Thanks.